Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a fantastic day. And joining me on this wonderful episode is my co-host, Micah. Micah, how have you been, my friend?
Good. How are you?
It's it was a long week.
Yeah, last
Um,
week was really long for me.
yeah, well, like so we had my son's birthday party this past weekend. And it was a pool party, so we went to the local pool, set everything up, and had a good time. Um, I've been also trying to get stuff together because we have our youth Labor Day retreat happening, which I have about 19 students going. So, which is the most I've had since I've been working here at this church. So, yeah, so that's exciting and also nerve-wracking at the same time because I had to change where we are staying at because we outgrew our capacity, and then also needed to rent a 15 passenger van because my chaperones wouldn't be able to bring all those kids up to Lakeside. So it was just so yeah, it was a lot. And then of course also yesterday I preached both services, had a third grade Bible presentation and third grade brunch to teach kids how to navigate and read their Bibles, and then had a youth cookout. So yeah, it's been, and then of course, I had VBS a couple of weeks back. So I'm just like, so this month of August has just been go, 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 go the whole entire time without slowing down.
Which is funny because churches tend to pick up like in September and going into the fall. But
Yeah. Yep, that is true. So I've just been going and never stop
never stop
until
believing.
my heart stops, and then that's it. But both physically and figuratively. So, with that being said, Micah, since I've been going so fast, I haven't really had time to have anything wild happen to me except for my TikTok account getting banned. That was weird. Still dealing with that, but
Yeah, I don't
and
understand that.
I don't know. And I even like sent something back and I got another reply saying, yeah, we can look into it. Send us your username. So I did. And it was the same still automated message. And they never gave me any specifics on why. And it's like, I almost want to say, hey, is there a number that I can call somebody over at the offices to really figure out what's going on? Because I'm very confused by this. But at the same time, it's been nice starting having a new account and starting fresh because now it's like the algorithm hasn't set in. So it's almost like I'm not seeing all this random stuff that I used to see because I interacted with it one time and now it's like I see all this random stuff. So, but yeah, so that's still an ongoing case. What about you? Anything strange happened to you last few weeks? Your child start walking now?
She's 2 months old.
I know, but she's a prodigy. She's a prodigy.
I've got a story for that, but I'm not sharing it on the podcast. Um, Family drama. Uh,
Oh,
it's fun. It's fun. Um, No, just school starts today. First day of classes are today at Miami. And so last week was move in, and marching band had their band camp last week. And um, we have a new dean in the college that I work for. And we had a big all faculty staff meeting last Friday, and I had to put together his slide deck. And that was fun going back and forth with him. And it was a huge project, and then we had other people speak within the meeting, and so I had to grab their slides. So I had to get slides from the provost and slides from the special assistant to the president, and uh, everybody has their own timetable, obviously, because they're busy with their own things. But it's like Friday at 1 o'clock and the meeting starts at 3 and people are still getting me their slides. So, yeah, a little stressful, a little hectic. I slept really good Friday night because it was just I was so exhausted last week. Um, Kid's doing great. She's growing, and it's weird because they just change a little bit every day. And starting to hold her head up a little bit better, and um, pretty soon she'll be able to sit up. And we'll put her in that little boppy chair or whatever it's called. Um, but yeah, school starts today, and I'm not taking classes this semester, obviously. But I've been talking with an advisor about starting a PhD program, but the next cohort doesn't start till next summer. So I think that's kind of the plan, is to take a class in the winter in January and also take a class in the spring because I need 3 electives, and I'll just take them as a non-degree seeking student, and then I will enter the cohort next summer and start my PhD.
All right, sounds good.
And Scott will still be writing on the Book of John by the time I finish.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. You'll be done way before I will.
Well, hopefully I mean, I know I'm not a very strong writer, and actually having an editor just really proves that because it's like every page is marked with red, and it's like you got to make these changes or this, or you need to reword this a little bit. And it's like,
did you ever have Dr. Ross at Anderson?
No, I never did.
So I had him for history of Old Testament in seminary, and the old adage goes, if it didn't look like he poked his finger and bled all over your paper, you weren't doing it right, because he was super picky about everything.
Yeah. So I think for me, like actually writing this stuff and having my ideas and doing my research, I mean, that's like, for me, that's the fun part. It's okay, now I have to rewrite this and go through all these edits. And that's what's taken a long time, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so horrible at this. So that's why I'm kind of doing both. It's like I'll work on a section of like editing my paper, and it's like, okay, let me read another book and let me get excited about my topic right now. But yeah, so it'll be fine. I'm slowly getting through it. It's I have to remember it's a marathon. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So the end is sight, whether I cross the line or I pass out before the line. I mean, I'll get there. So kind of
when is it? When are you supposed to be done with it? Or do you have like
in 3
a
years? In about 3 years. So yeah, so would be by spring of 2027, I should be done. Or before.
It's interesting because they told me I could do the whole process, the whole degree in 3 with writing.
Yeah.
So I may be done about the same time as you.
Maybe. And I mean, I think the thing is like they've even said,
actually, like, that's not true, because they said if it was 3 years and I start next summer, which is 25, it'd be 28. So if you're done in 27, I would be done in 28.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing too is they said that, if you know what your topic is, which I did kind of know ahead of time what my topic was. So a lot of the papers I've previously written, I can like use some of that stuff I've already written to incorporate into my paper. So it kind of makes the writing process a little bit more easier, because I can go, oh, here's all my sources I use. I can access them. Oh, here's this great quote. I can just copy and paste and do that. And it kind of helps speed that process a little bit along. But yeah. So Micah, what do you want to talk about today?
Oh, I guess we're going to talk about you because it's your podcast. But no, I was scrolling through LinkedIn the other day, and I noticed that you had celebrated 2 years at Bexley, and I kind of wanted to hear how you're doing and hear how things are going, and hear from you and your experience of jumping out of the Church of God pool for a couple of years, and just kind of just telling us how you're doing, how your family's doing, how your ministry life's doing. You don't seem nearly as stressed as when we first started this a couple of years ago when you were in search of a job. But you're in a new space now. And you've been
Yeah.
there for 2
So,
years, which is
oh
hard to
my.
believe.
Yeah. I mean, and the funny thing is it doesn't seem like 2 years because I feel like the previous churches I've worked at, and I know I've heard a lot of pastors talk about it. They always talk about the sophomore slump
Yeah.
where, you get into a new church, it's almost like the honeymoon phase, and you have a really good year, and then you get to your second year, and it just seems like everything just kind of not necessarily bottoms out, but it's almost like there's all this excitement, this hype, and then you kind of get like your base, right? Of how the culture that you're in or the church that you're working at kind of really is. And you're like, oh, okay. And that could be for a lot of different reasons why that sophomore slump hits. And I feel like I have not hit my sophomore slump on my second year. Like, um, and I think a lot of that is mainly because of being in a different place. And to be honest, I'm still kind of learning because there's still a lot of things theologically and not necessarily theologically, but almost like praxis, like how order of services do things, kind of like what their guidelines are for children and youth, and how many background checks do we do background checks every year, every couple of years, like there's a lot of different things that is different from how the Church of God does things that I'm still was still learning in my second year, which, for me, I'm a lifelong learner. So if I'm always learning something new, like that excites me. But yeah, I think that's been kind of good. Why haven't it stopped myself? The other thing is just the support. Like I haven't worked anywhere except for like my internship at the church I grew up in, where I feel like that I'm being encouraged weekly. And even like the few times where I've made like done something dumb or made a mistake or made a boo-boo, the fact that it's not it's not like stewing in the parking lot and it's not becoming rumor mill, but the person who may have had an offense against me was very good at coming up to me and talking with me and saying, hey, this happened. And we sit and we have a conversation and we kind of learn about it. And I kind of learn what decision I made affected that person. And we're able to talk about it like adults and come to some resolution and reconciliation. Like, I mean, to be honest, that's never happened. Very rarely that's ever happened at all the other churches I've worked at. And yet it's been kind of a staple here at the church I'm working at now. So, in Bexley. So, yeah.
So what are some of the differences that you're still trying to, is it like confirmation, things like that?
Yeah. So
Liturgy?
yeah. So, I mean, being part of it, having a liturgy is a different. The other thing is confirmation. This was my first year doing confirmation. So for me, it was like, it's very interesting because it's like, okay, again, I don't have a model of how this is done. Like I didn't go to a church that had like a confirmation. So it's not like I could use that as like a backup. So all this was fresh. So in some ways it was scary, but in some ways they kind of gave me the freedom of like, you present this material how you want. Like, here's the confirmation booklets that the students can go through, but and here's kind of what they've done in the past, but however you want to navigate this is your thing. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I did that. And I mean, it turned out really good. I mean, I had 17 confirmation students. And I navigated that. And I think what's nice about living in a small community and doing confirmation in a small community is that when I'm walking my kids to school, I'm seeing those confirmation students. Or if I'm like driving around or if I go to the library, I'll see them and I'll talk with them. And so it's very good opportunity to build those relationships with those students because your paths cross. And if it's not with the students, it's with their parents. And you see that all the time. The other thing too, like for example, I preached this past Sunday and, for the most part, I would just preach and all the other stuff, the someone, either a liturgist would do it, or the lead pastor will do all that stuff for me, because it's like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. But slowly I've been starting to kind of do more and more stuff. And the fact that in the traditional service, which are kind of contemporary service and traditional services are way different. And by different, there's just a lot more going on. Where I feel like in the Church of God, if you had a contemporary service or a traditional service, the music choice was different, but the way the service flowed was exactly the same. It was almost more of a stylized music choice, where if you go to a traditional service versus a contemporary service here at Bexley, it's not just the music that's different, it's just the whole service is different. You have a call to worship, the way you do offertory is different. And that was the one thing, because in our contemporary service, I'll pray for the offering, and then after I prayed for the offering, ushers would come, they collect the offering, and then the band plays the final song, and then you go into the benediction. Offertory here, I call the ushers for the offertory. I call the ushers to come up, and then I go kind of stand there, and I stand behind like the altar or the Lord's table. The music is playing. They go, they walk up, they grab the plates, they walk towards the back, collecting the money, and then they stay back there until the music's done playing. Once that song is done playing, they then play the doxology. Everyone stands up and they start singing, "Praise God from whom all blessing flows." And then they come down and they hand me the plate, and then I turn and I look towards the cross, and then I do a prayer. I do a prayer blessing over the offering, and then I put it back on the Lord's table, which is completely different from the other service. It's a lot more detailed. It's a lot more involved of what you're doing. And again, everything you're doing has a specific reason and a specific purpose. So it's a lot more ritualistic within our traditional service. So even that learning that stuff is very interesting to me, just to see that happening.
I think this is nothing really to do with the conversation, but I find it interesting coming out of COVID, how many churches have went back to taking offering, like with offering plates versus having like boxes, or some churches have just left it. And that's, the way they're doing it now, and they don't have to deal with finding ushers and things like that. But I also see the point in like, oh, if we have ushers, we can have volunteers and have different people serve, and it's another opportunity to serve. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think, a lot of times with cultures, if that's something that is an important part to the worship process for that specific denomination or that specific group of people that attend a contemporary or a traditional setting, that kind of becomes, a staple. And that's just another way people kind of use that as a way to worship. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
The other thing that's been interesting about there is I'm really seeing strong leadership in how to navigate things. And I think that has been a really good process to see, and how that's navigated. Because I think a lot of times you go into places, and even though you're the pastor, especially within the Church of God, even if you're pastor, depending on how your bylaws are written, a lot of times the pastor doesn't really have a lot of power. They don't even have a vote of what happens as far as how the church is run, how it operates, everything else. It's usually done by congregations, because the Church of God likes their autonomy. And that's always a big thing. And that's the one thing, and that's one thing that Jim said in one of his town halls, like, hey, I'm the director of the Church of God, and it's a position I hold with a lot of great care and a lot of great pride. However, I have no power to actually make any type of changes, because that has to be done by the General Assembly, by the GA. So with that,
which only meets every other year or whatever.
So I think within regards to that, the fact that, the way the UMC works is you have a pastor who, and again, you do have lay leaders and you do have all these different boards that people serve on, but they revere the pastor enough to know that this is somebody who has been appointed at this church, somebody that the bishop believes that this is the person that's going to help us kind of fix some of the lingering issues we may have had, whether they're issues we've always had or issues that may have been caused from the last pastor. And so we're going to trust their expertise and their judgment to help us so we can have a longevity within this church.
Which how often do you hear that?
Very rarely in the Church of God you ever hear that. Because again, you hear, because here's the thing. I know I've heard it. Oh, yeah, you went to Bible college. You went to seminary. You even have a doctoral degree. But you don't know anything. You don't know this church like I know this church.
I was born into this church.
I was born in this church. I know everything about this church. You just have a fancy piece of paper. That means nothing. And yet, you are a church that is continuing to not make budget. You are a church that continues to decline. You're a church that barely making an impact in the community. And yet, even though you kind of come to a realization, and yet you still want a full-time pastor to lead you, at least you have some type of thing saying, well, we need a pastor to kind of preach on Sunday to give us the word, but you definitely don't want a pastor to actually try to move you or to say, hey, here's some things we need to change within the policies or maybe even within the bylaws of the church, because as of right now, having this thing in here is dysfunctional and you're not a functioning church. And you don't want to say that because they're like, well, we've been functioning for 50 years. I'm like, well, yeah, you're functioning for 50 years. But 50 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago, you were at the height of your game. And yet now you're not. So if we want that to tick back up again, we're going to have to make some changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, and I think that's the other thing too, because I know a lot of people, especially within like churches and especially within the church I'm working at now, always talks a little bit about, oh, do we get a say or do we get a vote or do we get any type of point about a certain issue or a certain topic or certain things that are going on? And a lot of times the answer to that is no. And a lot of it has to do with how churches are run and their organization. And for good or for worse, you have to know that everything has it. So for me, kind of seeing how this particular UMC church handles business and handles voting and handles some of the challenges or issues, whether they're physical issues of dealing with the church, whether they're leadership issues, or whether they're how do we respond to what's happening within the global UMC as a whole, especially with the split that happened a couple years ago. Like, how do we react to it? What side are we as a church going to fall on? Are we going to stay at the UMC? Are we going to go global? How all that has operated, how that process. It would be a lot different if those types of challenges were presented within the Church of God. It would go a lot differently. And it probably won't go as smoothly. So I'm learning a lot, and I think the big thing is not only my learning, but I also have permission to ask questions because I can say this is different from what I'm used to. So how does this whole thing work? And yet people are humble enough to say, "Oh, here, let me explain it to you," and kind of guide me to here's how we do things. Here's the reason why, and not just here's how we do it. Here's kind of the reasons why we do it. And here's the history of why it's been like this, how we do things or conduct business this way for so long within the UMC. So I think that's been very interesting as well.
Yeah. How's your relationship with your staff and things like that going? And he praised Pastor Colleen all the time and how wonderful she is. Just, you know, working in other spaces, Church of God or not, how is this different?
So I think working with the rest of my staff has been fantastic. We get along very well. I mean, I guess I'm kind of like the comic relief because I just have a funny way of
You?
looking at. I know, shocker, shocker. It's me. So, um, but yeah, I think but I think a lot of times that just kind of brings a different element, and we're able to laugh about sometimes some of the mundane things in church, or maybe some of the stressful things in church life. But I'd also have to say that I also have a great group of volunteers. And, the fact that, you know, especially like, with this lakeside retreat coming up, it falls right on my wife's birthday. So every time when it's my wife's birthday, I'm doing a youth event. So, the fact that, hey, I'm able to go up a day early to not only set up for this event that I'm having with the youth, but also to be able to have some time with my family to celebrate Laura and celebrate, her, she's turning 40 this year. So celebrate this milestone of her birthday, and being able to do it and not have to worry about how are we going to get kids up here? Do I have to drive them? Because I have some volunteers who said, we can cover for you. We can take care of it. If you can take care of all the logistics, we will take care of everything else too. I mean, I was even thinking about just picking up the van like Friday afternoon and leaving it in the parking lot. And they said, no, we can go pick it up Saturday. You don't have to worry about doing that. So, I'm very grateful for all my volunteers. And I think a lot of times as pastors, or even as just or even just like lay leaders, I don't think we do enough bragging and praising, or even just making sure we let our volunteers know how much we appreciate them, how much we love them, and how much we respect everything they're doing. Because if it wasn't for them, I probably might have burned out a long time ago, or other pastors may have burned out a long time ago if we didn't have those volunteers in place. So, I think the relationship between both me and the staff and me and my volunteers have been good. And if there's any tension, they're very good at like talking to me about it. And, we talk about it, we kind of figure out a game plan, make some changes there, and kind of come to a resolution. And that's just kind of, how I always try to operate.
Do you how do you view the United Methodist Church now that you've been on it for 2 years versus what you've known, what you were accustomed to?
So, oh my goodness, I think, and
I'm asking hard questions today.
Here's the thing. I don't necessarily know if it's just the UMC thing, right? I want to know if it's just like any pastor who has maybe worked in one denominations, working in our denomination. Even though, and again, I'm a special case because I'm not ordained in the UMC. Like, I'm still ordained in the Church of God. I'm an auxiliary pastor, so I'm not really tweaking or trying to change their theology, and their theology is not really trying to change me. But being part of the same Wesleyan kind of tree, I really, besides just kind of how they conduct business and more of the administrative side of things, as far as how we do worship, how we do things, like I don't really see a lot of differences. I mean, yeah, when it comes to baptisms, the fact that they do sprinkle baptism, so they don't do immersion. That's a little bit different. And I think it's also helped too. I think the benefit that I have that probably most pastors don't is Pastor Colleen was part of the United Brethren, which was the group that merged with the Methodist Church that formed the UMC, and being ordained within the Brethren in the United Brethren denomination. they did immersion for their baptisms. So when she came over to once the UMC merge happened, she had to understand and learn why they do the sprinkling. She said, but once I kind of understood their process, it made sense. So I didn't have any qualms or issues with that. And we just kind of went that way. Um, so I think the other thing too is just the differences is I don't really see a lot of difference as far as worship, theology, and I know some people might roll their eyes like, well, the UMC's, supports, they're affirming of the LGBTQ, and like, yeah, that's true. At the same time, if you just want to take that and kind of put that off to the side, as far as when it comes to what do we believe about God, what do we believe about Jesus, what do we believe about the missions of the Holy Spirit, what do we believe about communion, it's very similar. It's just the way they practice it and the way they live out that theology is just different.
But to be clear, the UMC split too, so not all UMCs are like.
No, and again, and I think I've talked about this before, but depending on who you talk to, the split that happened was based out of fear, thinking that some things were going to go one way when actually in reality things haven't really changed at all. Like people like in some ways churches still have kind of a choice on who their minister is.
Mm-hmm.
So, if Bexley United Methodist Church does not want a pastor that is part of the LGBTQ community, the bishop would try to grant that request. There is some type of fluidity in that where there's still kind of a choice, where those who split believe that there wasn't going to be a choice, that, if this was made official, that because again, the whole part of this is the Book of Discipline says this about human sexuality, and yet on practice, it hasn't been done so based on their Book of Discipline. And they're trying to reconcile that so that the Book of Discipline matches of what they're doing with their practice, or we have to change our practice to match the Book of Discipline. And that really was the debate. And I think because of fear, if it went one way or the other, that's what caused this kind of this split with from the UMC to form the GMC. At least that's what I've been told from many UMC pastors who are kind of, that's kind of the consistent that I've been hearing on that topic. So,
Any other thoughts that you want to share, and or do you
I
like,
mean,
you seem happier and healthier, and this is just me being observant from.
yeah, I am. I think I am happy and healthier. And even though we've had a lot of like changes and there's still changes happening, I think just the way those changes are being talked about, how they're being processed, how they're being implemented, have been for the good. And I can't complain about that. And it is. And I mean, it has been a very healthy environment for me to really soar and to really use my gifts and talents for the glory of the Lord, and also for the betterment of the church and for the community that I'm in. So I think it's just kind of been I wouldn't say necessarily a match made in heaven. That's a little too extreme, because who knows? I could walk into the office on Tuesday and things could all blow up. But for the most part, it's just really been good for myself, for my ministry, and even for my family as well. So I can't really complain. And if I could complain, it basically would just be very minuscule issues or things that I'd be complaining about at this point. So no, it's been good.
I guess last question, am I, as I'm thinking about it, what would you say to folks? It doesn't have to be Church of God specific, because I know you and I both hold credentials in that church, church backgrounds. But what would you say to those who are thinking about trying another denomination, trying another church to work at. Not to say, hey, just leave the Church of God, don't leave the Church of God. But if you're looking for a job, you can't find a job within the Church of God. Like in your case, like this is what the church that was available when you were looking. What would you say to those who are, I don't know, hesitant, afraid?
Yeah. So here's what I would say. Because if the time ever comes that my time here at Bexley UMC ends, obviously the first place I'm going to start looking would probably be the Church of God, because again, I do hold my credentials with the Church of God. And again, I really, as far as just the idea of what the Church of God stands for and kind of the beliefs of the Church of God are something that I still kind of hold true within me. And what I would say is, even if you are looking, or maybe if you are someone who is without a church and you're a pastor and you're trying to find something and you're trying to find Church of God churches and you are just having difficulty because for whatever reasons, Atlas isn't working correctly, or there's just not enough out there that you see on Indeed or Just Church Jobs or all these sites, a lot of times, and I think this is true, I feel like a lot of times there's churches out there that are part of different denominations that are primarily looking for skill than necessarily denominational affiliation. Because when I would apply the stuff, sometimes, or even if I wasn't applying the stuff, my stuff was up there just like on an Indeed. And sometimes there'd be churches that would contact me because I matched the skill set that they were looking for and they want to interview me. And some of those were Brethren churches, some of those were Lutheran churches, some of those were Presbyterian churches, some of those were Church of God churches, some of those were Southern Baptist churches. Because I think that's the thing. If it's like, well, this person has a strong skill set and everything we need, the theological part can kind of come later. We can talk a little bit about that more when we're actually having those conversations and discussion. But right now on paper, this looks like this may be a good fit. So I would say for those who are kind of in that in-between thing, go ahead and put your stuff out there and apply for churches that may be different. Like a lot of times I apply for a lot of non-denominational churches because I didn't think like a Lutheran or Presbyterian would want a Church of God person. But apparently, that's how I got to Bexley. I had a skill set that looked like it would be a good fit for them. And after just a couple of interviews and everything else, it seemed to be a good fit. And right now it seems like that seemed to be true because things have been going well. So again, you don't know unless you try, right?
Right. So, that's all I have. I just wanted to kind of hear an update on your 2 years and see where you're at and where you're going and what you think.
Yep. All right. So friends, thank you so much for listening. And who knows, maybe you're in a similar situation like me. Maybe you're kind of a transplant into a different church and you're kind of noticing, hey, I'm learning a lot of new things. I'm learning, and who knows, maybe there are things like, hey, I'm learning these new things. So when that time comes, if I'm going to jump back to the denomination that I'm actually part of, here's some things that I can bring to the table because I've seen it work and I've seen how well run this thing is. Maybe you're someone who's kind of in between church jobs and you're just like, I don't know if I want to be at a UMC church or a Brethren church. I'm okay just being part of a Lutheran church. So you're looking for a Lutheran thing, go ahead and just apply. You never know what might happen, and sometimes I think a lot of times, and it really has to go to where is God leading you. And I think that was always a big thing. Every time when I saw a job that I thought looked enticing, I not only did I talk to my wife and my family about it, but I also prayed about it too and saying, God, is this going to be a good fit for me and my family? And I think having that type of conversation and that type of prayer really helps shape things. So hopefully that will be you. So friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and we'll be back on another episode. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. The Scott Stedman podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. Thank you so much for listening.